Hello everybody and welcome back to Unit 1 of Regents Chemistry, which is Math of Chem. Today we will be talking about the second part of significant figures where we'll see how we can round sig figs to a specific number. So if you guys have not checked out the first part yet, please make sure to do that before you watch this one. So whenever we have to round significant figures, there are some rules that are very similar to how we generally round numbers, like in math, but there are some additional rules that we do want to take care of. So the first thing is if we have a number that's greater than 5, we do the same old thing. We just increase our last number by 1. For example, here we have 42.68 grams. We want to round that to 3 sig figs, which means we only want to keep the 4, the 2, and the 6. So 8, as we see, is greater than 5, so this 6 can become a 7. So that would be 42.7 grams. If our next number is less than 5, then the number just stays the same. For example, we have 17.32 meters. We want to round this one to 3 sig figs as well. So we want to keep the 1, the 7, and the 3. The next number, which is 2, is less than 5, so we'll just keep that 17.3 meters. However, the problem comes when we have a 5. So not a number greater than that, not a number less than that. If we get exactly 5, so there are 3 different things that we want to look at. The first thing that we check is if we have any number, any non-zero digit after that 5. Let's say we have a 5-1 or a 5-2 or a 5-3, anything like that, not a 5-0. Then we can go ahead and increase our last number by 1. For example, here we have 2.7851 centimeters. We want to round that to 3 sig figs as well, which will be 2, 7, and 8. The next number is a 5. Now 5 is followed by a non-zero digit 1, which means we can increase our last digit, the 8, by 1. So that would become 2.79 centimeters. However, if we get a 5 which is not followed by any non-zero digit, then we go ahead and look at the previous number. Now, if the previous number is an odd number, we do increase our last number by 1. For example, here we have 4.635 kilogram. We want to keep the 4, the 6, and the 3 if you want to round this to 3 sig figs. The next number is a 5, which is not followed by any non-zero digit. So in this case, we look at the previous number, the 3, which is an odd number. So what we can do is we can add 1 to that 3. So that becomes 4.64 kilograms. And if we have a 5 not followed by any non-zero digit and the number before the 5 is an even number, then it just stays the same. So for example, if we have 78.65 milliliters, we want to round this to 3 sig figs, so we want to keep 7, 8, and 6. And the next number is a 5, not followed by any non-zero digit. We look at the previous number, the 6, which is an even number. So that means that even number, that 6 can just stay the 6, and our final answer will be 78.6 milliliters. Okay, so the only difference that we have in chemistry and specifically for rounding sig figs is if we get a 5. The first two things, if it's greater than 5, you add a 1. If it's less than 5, it stays the same. That's the same thing that we do in math as well. So let's look at some problems. Here we have 87.073 meters. We want to round this to 3 sig figs, which means we want to keep the 8, the 7, and the 0. So let's try to look at how many sig figs do we have right now. So we have the Pacific side on our left, we have the Atlantic side on our right. So right now, because the decimal is present, we start from the Pacific side and we stop our arrow as soon as we hit the first non-zero digit, which is 8. So that's when we start counting. Overall, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So currently, we have 5 sig figs. When we round this to 3 sig figs, we want to keep the 8, we want to keep the 7, and we want to keep the 0. And we want to get rid of the 7 and the 3. So the next number after our last sig fig is a 7, which is greater than 5. So we can just add 1 to our last sig fig. So the answer in this case will be 87.1 meters. Okay, now we have 4.3621 times 10 to the power of 8 meters. Now, whenever you get a number in scientific notation and you're asked to round that, just do not worry about the power of 10 part. All we are looking at is this first number, the 4.3621. Okay? First thing, once again, is we want to know how many sig figs do we have right now. Here we have the Pacific side, then we have the Atlantic side. Because the decimal is present, we start from the Pacific side. And as soon as we hit our first non-zero digit, which is 4, we start counting. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sig figs right now. When we round this to 3 sig figs, we'll keep the 4, we'll keep the 3, and we'll keep the 6. The next digit is a 2, which is less than 5, which means our last sig fig, the 6, can stay the 6. So that would be 4.36 times 10 to the power of 8 meters. Here's another example. We've got 9,009 meters. Once again, we want to round this to 3 sig figs. So there we have the Pacific side. There we have the Atlantic side. Now the decimal is absent, so we start from the Atlantic side. And as soon as we hit our first non-zero digit, which is 9, we start counting. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Currently, we have 4 sig figs. When we round this to 3, we want to keep the 9 and we want to keep the 0 and the 0. And we want to get rid of the last 9. Now that 9 is greater than 5, which means we can add 1 to our last 0. So that would become 901. However, we've got a problem here. Compare 901 with 9009. Even though we have the correct number of sig figs here, and even though we have rounded this, there's a huge difference between 901 and 9009. Whenever we round numbers, we want to make sure that we are not changing the number at all. So here we are going from 9,000 all the way to 900, which we cannot do. So in order to deal with that kind of problem, what we can do is we can add a 0 at the end. So now this number becomes 9,010. And let's quickly check if we still have the correct number of sig figs. Well, the decimal is still absent, so we start from the Atlantic side. We start making our arrow, and remember, we do not start counting the sig figs until we hit the first non-zero digit, which in this case will be 1. So overall, we still have 1, 2, 3, 3 sig figs. That's exactly what we need in our answer. Alrighty, and then our 9,010 is also very close to the actual number, the 9,009. So make sure that you guys are, after you have rounded, make sure you also check if you have the correct number of sig figs and if your answer is kind of the same number as the actual question. Okay, last question. We've got 629.50 meters. We want to round this one to 3 sig figs as well. So here we have the Pacific side, then we have the Atlantic side. The decimal is present, so we start from the Pacific side, and as soon as we hit our first non-zero digit, which is 6, we start counting the sig figs. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So currently we have 5 sig figs in this number. When we round this to 3 sig figs, we want to keep the 6, the 2, and the 9. The next number is a 5, and that 5 is followed by a 0. Which means we'll have to look at the previous number, because remember our rule number 3 said that 5 has to be followed by a non-zero digit so that we can add 1 to the last number. But if it's not followed by a non-zero digit, then we look at the previous number. And if it's an odd number, that's when we add a 1. If it's an even number, then we leave it the same. So we look at our previous number, which in this case is 9, an odd number, which means we will go ahead and add a 1. So our answer will be 630 meters. Now, we've got a problem here. And that problem is that this number does not have 3 sig figs because, so you see how decimal is absent. So when we start counting from the Atlantic side, we will not start counting the sig figs until we hit 3. So this number is only going to have 2 decimal places. So to fix that problem, what we can do is just add a decimal there. So after we have added the decimal, now we will start from the Pacific side, and the first non-zero digit will be 6, and that will be our first sig fig. So in this case, now we are going to have three significant figures in our answer. That's exactly what we need. Okay, so you just added that small decimal at the end, and that changed the number of sig figs that we had. And we are still very close to the original number. We went from 629.5 to 630, which is awesome. Alrighty, so that is it for this part. In the next section, we will see how we can do a couple of calculations with using the significant figures. So I'll see you guys in the next one.